I like the word invent more than imagination. It reminds me of someone obsessively working in a laboratory, concocting potions and trying to figure out how to make something work. My name is Steve Chmilar, and I've been a full-time artist since around 2012. I intentionally try to reside between the place of traditional realism, and I try to combine that type of technique with the very imaginative, very creative, new surrealist world. I really love the light in a lot of the old paintings, and much of that comes from their limitation, their desire to use warm light, which of course is, I think, universally pleasing. Everybody loves that feeling of warmth. And so the warm sunlight type of glow that old masters were trying to get, combined with their knowledge of how to render that, but their limitation as well. So that because they did not have some of the brightest pigments a long time ago, the cadmium yellow and cadmium red light and those kinds of pigments, so they could not represent some of the appearances that we get now of light, which could be too much in some ways. I usually don't make color studies anymore. I find that I've played with light enough that I feel like I've gained a much deeper understanding of color through actually playing with physical light and colored light temperature, and lighting maquettes and dioramas that I've built. I tried to work strictly from imagination before, and the maquettes became just a necessity at one point. I thought, if I'm going to create a scene where I want every single aspect of the painting to be rendered, I wanted to know exactly how that looked and why it looked that way. And so that's what I've done with light, and trying to understand exactly why it looks the way that it does, and how it relates, of course, to choices of local color, choosing to build a maquette and then paint it dark, or maybe paint it light, or paint it a certain color and then have the light react to that as well. I want the colors to reflect a feeling, and that is usually a conscious juxtaposition with subject matter. So to have elements of a picture which are very soft, if you have like a lot of metal objects surrounded by feathers or something, that's much more interesting, just in terms of texture, but then also in terms of societal significance or meaning. Why am I painting a certain thing? And that was the very first question I had to ask myself when I got very serious about painting. If I'm going to sit in front of a wood panel for weeks and months, I better have a good reason. I think about the colors of nature being the first influence, and then adding only what is necessary. I remember actually learning from an audio person about frequencies, that if you're like playing live music and you have a sound mixer with all of the different dials, that if you start with all of the dials at 12 o'clock, so they're not either subtracting or adding anything, and start from there in the simplest possible way and only add and subtract what is needed, that's where I'm starting from with color as well. I'm always thinking warm or cool for the most part, first, and then I might get more specific after that. I balance out the warm and the cool from knowledge of light specifically, and just knowing that the warm light will give me a different color of whites. So I'm putting a bit of ochre into my white, and then quite often, not always, but that's a good starting place to have something like ochre or raw sienna in some white, so that it's still quite light and bright on the grayscale, and then using that mix of paint, that warm white, as the white for the entire painting pretty much. And then of course, if there's cool light, then relative to the warm light, I wouldn't need to actually usually ever add blue. It's really just white itself is cool enough. And again, it's just playing with that subtlety, that desire to make those colors look realistic. I also do like to have a hint of every color in there somewhere, so that when the viewer sees the painting from a distance, they might think that it's primarily just a certain color. And then when they get closer, they hopefully will see that there's little hints of everything scattered throughout the painting if they look closer. And that's part of the reason to try to get them to look closer and invite them to look closer. let's say, for example, with titanium white, uh, I think it's very common for painters to use a lot of it when they're inventing a scene, and to not really think about what the light color is actually doing. And so that kind of scene, maybe that's more illustrative. You think about like maybe a comic book, or something very illustrative in a comic book style that is supposed to be very saturated and exuberant, and have nothing to do with natural colors. Um, that to me is the opposite of what I'm going for. So I am trying to ground everything in a feeling of what light will actually do to shadows, and make that be the dominant theme throughout the work. I'm fairly simple in my materials. I've just used pigment directly from the tube, and then I started using stand oil. I experimented with it at first when I started painting 2007 or 8. Didn't really understand it, and then I started using it in all of my paintings probably from about 2015, just to retain the gloss and to sometimes slow down the drying time a little bit. The viewer will always see the subject matter first. So to me, color has always been something that fell into place kind of out of necessity of what this subject matter is. And then when I know what the subject matter is, which is often sketched in monochrome graphite, then the color kind of seems to get placed in terms of necessity. And then I know, okay, well, maybe that object has to be like a certain yellow color or something. And then the light will affect that. And so that same object under different types of lighting would look different relative to the lighting, but it might actually be the same color. That's one piece of advice I could give. I mean, also just looking at paintings, looking at your favorite pieces and doing color studies from them. The other thing too, all these color schemes that we have going back, they're not patented. So if you steal the colors directly from an old painting, but change the subject matter, people are going to see the subject matter, and they're not going to say like, oh, you stole those colors from that other painting. It's not easily traceable. And they will often change anyways. Like even if I've tried to steal colors from a painting, by the time you finish your own version of it, it's different anyways. My number one trick is to understand light and why things look the way that they do. By playing with light, I've learned things that are much deeper internally. If you can make a maquette look great just with its own local colors under really boring or overcast light, then by the time you add other light effects, maybe some warmer light from one side or cooler light from another side, it can look that much more magical. So the light is where the magic really comes from. So it's a combination of those two things, the understanding of the local color and the light color, and that covers everything.
A huge thank you to Steve Chmilar for sharing his time, art and insights on his approach to colour and light. You can learn more from Steve on his YouTube channel. And of course there's plenty to discover on ours too, and at opusartsupplies.com. Thanks for watching.